Shalom and welcome to this edition of Contextual Bible Study. My name is Denny Thompson. Today we're on the 37th lesson of this entire series on my YouTube channel. And today I'm entitling Back to Babel. And that may not make much sense right now, but I think it will as we go on here. Now, Prophet Hosea said this, and he said, "My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge." Now, he was referring, of course, to the Bible, to the scriptures, for people to understand the scriptures so that they don't get deceived. But I think that whole principle can go beyond that and be applied to like everything, to just general knowledge of what's going on. Now, in terms of this particular approach, it's going to be a little bit different than previous ones so far, this study, I should say. We're going to look at this. We're going to look at this idea of this one world government that is prophesied is going to be coming, prophesied in Revelation, and also one world religion, kind of this combination of all of that. And it's not a new story, it's an old story. It's a very old story, which is kind of the idea behind this study. We go back into the context of all these stories. So that's actually what we're doing today. And this whole idea of Babel will make sense here as we get into this deeper. So we have these two different ideas, the end times Bible prophecy, the one world government, and the one world religion. Now, one of the things you'll remember from previous studies that's important is, where is this first mentioned in the scriptures? It's not in Revelation, for sure. It's way before that. It's at the beginning. This idea of the principle first mentioned, just to go back over that, to what it means is, in order to understand any Bible concept, you must begin by understanding the very first time it's mentioned. And in every single case, it's in the Torah, the first 5 books, including this. So an example, and I've used this before, the idea of atonement. What does that mean? Where's the first mention? The Hebrew word is kippur. From the Hebrew root kafar, to cover, to cleanse, is merciful or pardon. And literally it means pitch. And where it was first used was back here, okay, with the ark. And in this particular verse, so make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat, kafar, there it is right there, it would pitch inside and out. Okay, now the idea behind this is just literally a picture of atonement, which is going to be coming up eventually, is the idea that this pitch is going to cover those boards and is going to keep the abyss, the ocean, from getting inside, from sinking the ship. In other words, it's going to bring life to those inside the boat. That's the idea of covering. So kafar means covering or source. And eventually that's the source of our atonement. Okay, those words right there, it literally pitch. And where it later comes into play, of course, is this covering. This is the story of the Passover. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Okay, so it's that blood which became the covering, in this case, for sin. And of course, eventually Jesus said it is blood that makes atonement for life, or mentioned in Leviticus, but Jesus played this out in his life. What he did was to be the ultimate in atonement. Okay, now that's just to kind of go back and kind of get this idea first mentioned. But let's get into this today. So, the very first mention of this whole idea of this one world government, one world religion, and we're being really infiltrated with this whole idea today. That's one reason I'm doing this right now. I originally was planning on doing this somewhere down the line, but I kind of moved it up. Anyway, the very first mention is, of course, Tower of Babel. Now I put this rabbi's name right here, Rabbi Daniel Lapine, because he is a modern day rabbi, but he's citing ancient sources. I use many of his ideas in this teaching. He goes back to the original Hebrew and studies it and cites the original sources going way back in time to kind of develop some of the ideas behind what I'm going to show you right here. Now, Babylon, this is the second most mentioned city in the Bible, almost 300 times. It's always negative. It's always in regards to rebellion against God. So the original pagan beliefs spread throughout the world. They all started there in Babylon. Almost 2,000 years, the most important city in the world, Babylon was, because it was a commercial, intellectual, financial center, crossroads linking all parts of the world, and also religious centers, I mentioned. Symbolic or real, it will once again become the center of the world, because the Bible tells us that. So where was it? All right, on this map right here, you can see what I've circled in. It's in present-day Iraq. It was right about there. That's where it was. The hub of the world, the center part. And in Revelation, as I've already mentioned, and I'm sure you know, it's mentioned many times. In terms of economy, Revelation 13 is global economy. And this idea of the mark of the beast, which we'll mention here later in the presentation. The worship of the Antichrist, Revelation 14. This one world government, Revelation 16. And this mystery religion in Revelation 17. Now, right after going back to the ark again, right after this, there was a repopulation of the earth. Okay, let's go back to that story. And that was told in Genesis, recorded in Genesis 10. Now, this print is, of course, very small, so you're not going to be able to read it, but I'm just going to pull out certain highlights here. Of course, Noah's sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, and then the sons of Ham, we're going to zoom in on just Ham, were Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. And specifically, Cush, let's follow Cush generation, the next generation, is Nimrod, which is going to be very important. He's a very, very important character in this story. The word Egypt, or the name Egypt, in Hebrew it's Mitzrayim, and we'll run into that from time to time too. So on this map, we can see these sons of Noah. Japheth, you can see where he settled, Shem, and Ham. So as I said, we're going to zoom in from Noah, we're going specifically to Ham, and then Cush, and then to Nimrod. Okay, so let's do that. So these are Ham's sons. And we're looking at Cush. So there we go, first. And his son, Nimrod. So Nimrod is going to settle over where this arrow is right here, which is going to be the area of Babylon, of ancient Babylon. All right, so back to the text. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it was said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, Nimrod is a Semitic word, not really a Hebrew word. And what it means is rebellious one or rebellion, which is a very significant name, and it fits perfectly. Literally, what it means is to get down, I'm above you. Or in other words, I will rule over you. Me, the rebellious one, Nimrod. So again, Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. So let's look at a couple key words here. Hahal is a verb in Hebrew, which is an action word. It means who became. So that's that word translated that way. It implies a brand new revelation, a transformation, something totally new. And this is going to be without God, as we'll see. Now, today we would relate this to a lot of the organizations that are anti-God, secular humanist type movement, the New World Order, which we'll talk about, the Red Green Alliance. That'll make more sense after a bit. But all these movements today that are really kind of trying to bring the United States down are all kind of based in the same idea as Nimrod's. He was a hunter. Now, obviously, weren't they all hunters back then? Except he was hunting people, trying to seduce them into being subservient. Nimrod was. There are Nimrods in every generation in terms of the Bible perspective here. And some of these pictures here, all the emperors of Rome were in many different ways. Genghis Khan, you can see below, of course, Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong. One after the other after the other. This is just a few of the countless lists through the history. And of course, coming, we have the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So there are many. So as King Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun, because human nature is human nature, and it keeps repeating itself. Now, the lies of Genesis 3 are really the ones that just keep coming back over and over again, because Satan is the father of lies. Of course, he said, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? That's kind of the idea that the Bible's not absolute. He said you will not certainly die. There are many pathways to God. There's not one. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. And that whole idea is popularized today that, in a sense, I am God, I am the source of all truth. So Satan is behind every single lie in history, including what we're looking at today. He has no truth. His method is to destroy God's truth. Often, though, he uses a technique of using an element of truth rather than just saying something, rather than implying something completely off the wall. No one would believe he has elements of truth. So here's a text about the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. So let's look at it. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." The Lord said, "If, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So let's go back into more specifically here. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. So the word for language is lashon and speech is dabar. There are two words similar in meaning for emphasis. That Hebrew does that quite often. And then this is followed by as people moved eastward. And we can see by the footnote it will say from the east, which is significant. Because if they're moving from the east, what were they doing? What does the east even represent in the scriptures? Well, look back at the original story. Now the Lord planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. Okay, so there we go, in the east. That's this whole idea of where God is. And if we look at the layout of the tabernacle, we can see on the east is the tribe of Judah. And of course, Christians understand that Jesus is the Lion of Judah. And he is the one, part of the tribe, that is located from the east, which is the direction of life, actually, in the scriptures, as we've learned before. It's the only entrance to the tabernacle. As you can see here, it's this kind of these colorful draped area right in front of the tabernacle. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah. Only one entrance, the gate of the court it was called, and Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So this idea of the east is where God was, and also Jesus is carrying us through in his life and teachings. So the Tower of Babel further. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, or from the east, they found a plain in Shinar, and they settled there. Now, here's where Shinar is, as you probably know already. The plain is a bigger area surrounding Babylon. Okay, and there's Babylon. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Now, this is actually a sign of rebellion against God. Now you might wonder why. What are you talking about here? What's this got to do with anything? This whole idea of bricks instead of stone. God's view of stones and bricks and altars back then. Let's look at it. He said this, "If you make an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones." That means like bricks, ones that have been cut out by people. "For if you wield your tool on it, you'll profane it." That idea, that people would profane it. So his altars were to be made of stones. He built an altar, this is in Joshua. He built an altar with uncut stones on which no iron chisels had been used. This was the Lord's servant Moses had commanded the people of Israel in the book of Moses' teachings. This is on Mount Ebal. And then the opposite, a people who continually provoke me to my very face, offering sacrifices in gardens and burning incense on altars of brick. All right, right there. So, And let's look at this one. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." Okay, so what's the idea behind all this? Well, up until that time period, buildings were made with stones. That's what they were made with. So this is very innovational. And this is something that God spoke against back then. So why? What's the difference between bricks and stones? Who made each? Well, if we think about it, the bricks, okay, obviously they're carved by people. They were made by people. They were hewn. And the stones were made by God. They're all different sizes, unique shapes, that type of thing. And that's what he wanted his altars made out of. So the bricks are totally uniform. They're all the same. And all these stones are uniquely different, totally. So carrying that idea further, the symbolism. The idea of the bricks is the idea of man, the group, all the same. And the idea of the stones are everyone is an individual before God, uniquely created by God. Okay, so begin to see what this picture looks like, because it's very significant to this story. So the idea of the bricks further would be the idea of dethroning God. Well, I don't have to do what you said. We're gonna make it ourselves. And they're also denouncing individualism. Okay, man's going to be the same. We're going to just carve them out. Nimrod was saying they're all going to be the same. We'll take care of it. We'll do it. I'll do it as God. And of course, God's truth is something different. It's Judeo Christian, based on the scriptures, of course. The idea that everyone is an individual, everyone is sovereign, uniquely created in God's image. So the group is man's systems, and the stones are God's truth or God's systems. It's going to be this Judeo-Christian idea, which is going to be developed through the scriptures. If we carry it even further, we can have these bricks representing things like socialism, fascism, communism, allegiance to the state, which controls all truth. So it has to be uniform. They have to be the same. That's what these systems become. That's literally what they became over time. So where in the Bible were bricks associated with slavery? And even to that extent with slavery, like you have to conform completely. Well, you probably remember the one of Ham's sons' name was Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim, remember I told you a minute ago, is the Hebrew word for Egypt. So that's where it was, Egypt, Mitzrayim, which literally means to limit, confine, or slavery. And Mitzrayim was one of the sons of Ham. So see how this picture is developing here? This whole idea of Egypt itself is a picture of a brick, of slavery. And God is going to release them from this uniformity, in this case the Pharaoh's put on them, you all have to be the same, you do this job, and make them free and bring them over to this promised land. So these pictures are really cool. I think they're pretty fascinating. This is the way Hebrew works. It's a very picture-oriented language. So they use bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. And that has significance too. Tar for mortar. Kemer is the word which means tar, slime, or asphalt. So normally this was not the case. This is innovative, totally innovative. In a sense, this is in defiance of God. Nimrod is saying, I've got the latest technology. This will stand. He's going to use something besides mud. He comes up with this idea of tar. Now, again, it doesn't mean the bricks are evil, that type of thing, obviously through, today using them as a building material. These are pictures that God is using to illustrate a much deeper idea, much deeper principles. Okay, then they said, come, let's build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Okay, now reaching to the heavens, this idea. Now, that can be presented as a noble cause, like ending poverty or trying to make people equal. So in other words, the goal could be okay, could be kind of good. The problem is there's deception in this. Leaders will use this to deceive you. Remember I said Satan is the deceiver. He uses a bit of truth to bring about his deceptions. Many are deceived. We're deceived by this. Nimrod and future leaders like him too, all these future leaders that are going to come through history, knew the ultimate goal, did the many he deceived to understand what exactly he was doing or they were doing? Well, many did not understand. So, in that story, in this particular story, the Lord Yahweh said, if his one people am speaking the same language, they begin to do this. Okay, that was that text we read. Back in the story of the flood, God's name is not Yahweh, it's Elohim. Now, there's a difference in terms of meaning. Elohim refers to the Almighty, the Judge, whereas Yahweh refers to this very close, personal, compassionate name of God we've learned about before here. So not so in the story of the flood. So something is different there. The people were referred to, the Hebrew word is basar, which literally means flesh, the meat of animals, like no soul. And we know the Lord regretted he had made human beings on the earth. So in other words, the corruption and the sin was so great at the incident of the flood, God wanted to wipe them out and start over. But something different is here because the word Yahweh is used to describe God's personal name. It's his close, compassionate, personal name of God. And people is Am, which refers to the common man, and it's not bizarre. It's not this no soul type thing. It's kind of this this innocent type people. It implies that God knew they were being deceived when they might have had good intentions. So again, this is important to understand this whole story and what is to come here. All right, and those are really key words right there to understand all of it. So for an example here, I just want to give you an example from history. The guy on the left's name is Elder Hiss. The guy on the right's name is Whittaker Chambers. They worked together. This was during World War II. They both become communist agents. All right, and they worked together. Now, Elder Hiss came from kind of a privileged background, highly educated. Whittaker Chambers from a very broken family. And he was attracted to this whole idea of communism because of the common man and we can, to join the group and have this camaraderie. He kind of looked at it that way. Elder Hiss was fully aware of what communism was all about. So I put the word Basar and Am as an example because Hiss was fully aware of what communism was doing, and he was a secret agent in the United States, whereas Whittaker Chambers was not. He joined up. Then over time, what happened is Whittaker Chambers, when he started to see the horrors of communism, he got out of it. He decided, I want nothing to do with this. And he tried to inform our government what was going on. The press treated him absolutely horrible. They treated him, they described him as overweight, kind of a doofus. He didn't know what he was talking about, or they idolized Hiss. So that's what they did. And Whittaker Chambers, it got to the point where he over and over again tried to testify, but no, they would not listen, and he just got mocked and defamed, that kind of thing. He actually tried to take his own life. He tried to set up this system where he was going to die, I believe he was using carbon monoxide. He had this gas system. He wanted to kill himself once he fell asleep. The mask he put on when he woke up in the morning was not totally secure, and he wasn't dead because he had enough air coming in. He was extremely sick, though. He actually went before Congress that day and testified as sick as he was at that time. So he got to the point where he was going to give up, just commit suicide. In this state of desperation, one day something happened to Whittaker Chambers. He was sitting with his wife and daughter, and he just looked into his daughter's eyes and just watched them for a while. The complexity of how the eyes work. And he come to the idea that this is amazing. That literally that's how he had this connection with God. God created her eyes. And so it began kind of a study, kind of a pathway of study for him searching. And he did just that. Eventually, Whittaker Chambers became a very devout Christian. And his whole life turned around. He had meaning in life after all these unbelievable things that he had faced. There's a book about this. It's called Witness, and it's well worth reading. It's long, but it's an amazing story. It'll tell you so much about human nature and also a very, very important part of our history. Because had we listened to Whittaker Chambers, I can almost guarantee you a lot of history would have been different, but we didn't. He was mocked, he was defamed, and kind of written off, unfortunately. And Hiss, he shows up at Yalta, a conference where FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, was very sick and not thinking too well. He was deceived greatly by the guy on the left, Stalin. Stalin just really got some things that happened at Yalta that are very, very bad. It gave a lot of power to the Soviet Union, eventually to Communist China. And Elder Hiss was right there, kind of talking in FDR's ear, literally defending what Stalin was saying, not out loud, but he was literally repeating Stalin's talking points to FDR, and it was really not good. So that's actually how that all played out. Now, biblical justice is blind. Social justice is not blind. So we have this idea of the blind right here. Biblical justice demands that everyone be equal in the law. Social justice demands that everyone be equal, period. Factors like race and sexual preferences are central. Biblical justice asks who did it. Social justice asks why did he do it. All right, so we have this idea of Lady Justice with a blindfold on her. Now, right after this, right after Jesus was in the wilderness, his first teaching was repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he was, of course, speaking of individual, not group salvation. All right, back to the story. Then they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. All right, so leaders like Nimrod had another mission. One world government to control people. And that's literally what this was at that time period. This is the world, and he was going to have this control over all people. Pure deception is man's way, not God's. Clearly, they know that they are defying God. From the lie of social justice comes a multitude of deceptions and false teachings. So, he knew exactly what he was doing. He had a mission, and his mission was to deceive the people. So the Lord scattered them from there over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, which means confusion, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So the idea of nations is God's plan. And today we're beginning to hear that nationalism, or the idea of nations, is evil. And the globalism is what is good. So those that talk about this idea of nationalism or nations, it's no good. Those are the ones that are wrong. And the prophet Isaiah talked about, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. So these are literally being flipped because it was God's plan to have nations. And you can see exactly what's happened here. It's God's plan with nations to avoid another Babylon. He didn't want this to happen again. Look at some of these ideas in the scriptures, like Deuteronomy 2:9. Then the Lord said to me, do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land. So he was talking about this whole idea of borders, of nations. And this one, cursed is anyone who moves their neighbor's boundary stone. All right. So this is central to God's plan, this whole idea of order. Churchill, who was at Yalta too, made the statement, socialism, the dream of Nimrod, notice how he was understanding this whole system here and the history, can make everyone equally miserable. That's what he said. And the tyrants of history want to control education, communications, that, of course, a common language. They propose prosperity and equality, but that's not really what's going on here. The real goal is to take control and to deliver the very opposite. They view the common man with contempt, kind of like a guinea pig. They will follow us no matter what we say. Going way back in time, this idea of a state government from Plato, the Republic, he said this, the state, the government, can raise children better than their parents. And that's another of the key ideas that has followed through the history. And if we look at even modern day history, the 20th century, some of these characters right here, that's Marx, of course, the battlefield begins with a rewriting of history. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to kind of recreate history, and they all do. Hitler, if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. Okay, and boy, do we see that today. You just keep repeating it, eventually people will repeat it, even though there's no truth to it. And the guy in the upper right there is Lenin. Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted. So their ideas were pretty clear about children and education. We're going to rewrite history. We're going to brainwash the children. It's going to be central. because the idea that children are the ward of the state. The state, not the family, is supreme. This is going to be central to these types of movements. And you're hearing this today. Schools keeping from parents ideas of name changes or puberty, them taking puberty blockers or transgender surgeries or any list of things is becoming popular. That was unheard of when I started teaching. As I mentioned before, a public school teacher. And these kinds of things are just something that has occurred in the past several years. It's really alarming. The state is the source of all truth. And of course, immorality prevails. So this whole idea and these oppressive systems where the children are the ward of the state. In Mao Zedong's China, which has become very popular today, his version of communism is something that's embraced by a lot of the elites. Under something called the Cultural Revolution, he had children turning in their parents for things they had said in their house. And he had children become something called his Red Guard, which is like his military, literally. Qianxian, I think I'm pronouncing it approximately right, means all under heaven in the Chinese language. And the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, their idea is that's an ancient idea, but they picked this up. They want world domination. They refer to it as the 100 Years' War. In 100 years from 1948, when communism was formed, 100 years later, they will have gained control of the world. So that specific version of the communism, Marxism, has become very, very popular today. Now, the picture on the right is an older gentleman before the tomb of his parents. And this is a pretty common scene in China today. What's going on here? He had turned in his parents for speaking against Mao. And then as he grew older, he realized how he had been deceived. And there are people literally, older people today who literally by these graves are just crying for how they had been deceived and they turned in their own parents. It's really quite a vision there. Now in the Nazi Youth Corps, these are examples to illustrate these techniques. They taught anti-family, they are extremely immoral organization. This whole idea of we're going to gut the family being the source of control, it's going to be the state. That was central to Hitler's idea in Nazism. Now, the reason I put the word Dr. Heller there is he was the best teacher I ever had, ever. I had him in a university I went to called Taylor University. He was a history teacher. He was amazing. He was there during World War II. He was a member of the Nazi Youth Corps. He told us stories that were incredible. One day he met Hitler because Hitler went around to all these youth gatherings. And usually like kind of a culmination meeting, they were told they're going to have a special guest speaker and then Hitler would walk in and he would shake everyone's hand and look into their eyes. He told us all about this. It was incredible. Now, Dr. Heller was an amazing man. He was a pastor. He had married an English lady. I think they had 8 or 9 kids. He'd asked my wife and I to be his assistants, kind of like his youth pastor, and we would have gotten free housing for doing that. We were just about to get married. We were going to do this because I thought, what an opportunity. Then I started hearing stories that something bad was going on with Dr. Heller. And the stories were coming out that there were some incidents with women, with some actually girls on the campus. And I didn't believe it, nor did most people on the campus. I thought somebody just starting these stories. But over time, long story short here, it turned out to be true. He was messed up inside. He was a very immoral person. We wind up, and I don't even know why. I just kind of had this feeling, my wife and I, that I don't think we should take this job. So we didn't. And then we realized later, wow, was that the right decision? Because he was a very messed up person, very immoral. And nobody had any idea. It literally tore our campus up because it took a long time for people to really even understand this. And the reason I tell you this story is that's how powerful it is when and they know these despots of history, when they can capture a youth and they can brainwash them and they can rip the morality without just take it away from them completely. It was a personal experience I'll never forget. All right, so this guy's name is John Dewey. He's a modern day kind of the guru of public schools, our public schools. In his statement, he said his major belief was you can't make socialists out of individuals. Now, Dewey was very enamored with the Soviet Union. He wanted to pattern our schools after them. Okay, now I didn't even know this initially. I started teaching in 73. I never really heard much about this at all or whatever. And really, there was no impact on us. But over time, Dewey's ideas started to web into education over time. And I started seeing a few of them. And today, they're very, very heavy. His whole idea of socialism is massive. It's gotten so big because you have this culmination of over a period of time of teachers, older teachers retiring and new ones coming up and being brainwashed, and kind of this whole cycle of picking up these ideas, these lies. So why the assault on youth? Well, this is a direct assault. Of course, a part of its power, obviously. You get the youth, you have the next generation. It's also an assault on God because of this commandment. Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. This is the only commandment that has a promise connected right to it. And so that will be one that Satan is obviously going to target very quick. So the loyalty to the state and the hatred of God is the lie that all of these despots are going to try to do to children is a direct assault on all of this. So these children, if we go back to that Am and Basar, remember those words, Am in the Tower of Babel? Okay, just for people, and Basar means that they're very intentionally evil people. Obviously, children are Am. And this big thing today is to turn them into social justice warriors. Now, again, that word is very loaded, and there's justice that we should all be a part of, but there's a lot of deception going on today with this. And so we have, in many cases, we have school grades and accountability, that kind of thing going down, and we have more of an emphasis on this whole idea of turning them into social justice warriors, which is not the ultimate or the primary intent of schools anyway. Now, Jesus said, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck. These crushed olives, they weigh about 1,000 pounds. Put this around your neck, anybody who does this, to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And I think you guys will remember the sea represents the abyss or hell itself. In the Jewish thinking, Hebraic thinking, that even underneath that water were these caverns going down into this underworld. That we've went over that before. So what he's saying is, if you attack the children, you will have the ultimate punishment. And all these despots go directly against us. And Jesus is saying, when he said this, the people in his audience, he probably said it right next to the Sea of Galilee here, probably pointing to it, that's my guess, would have shuddered. We understand, Rabbi. We understand exactly what you're saying. And it's dire consequences for those who try to mess with the children. Now, why is the United States the center of the assault today? And it is. We are the center of the massive assault of the world, along, of course, with Israel. Well, the big lie. The United States is formed as a secular slave country. Okay, that's not true. That's not the original and main idea of why the United States was formed. The Constitution and Declaration are both based on the Bible. And almost every forefather was a devout Christian. And in the Declaration it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So the government's idea is to preserve the rights that God gave each person. And that's how we were created as a nation. And that is exactly against what the globalists and all these people that want to start another modern day Babylon they're against that, because that's individual. That's the individual. So our country is so unique in world history. I don't think we sometimes really realize it. Preserving the rights of each person, or go back to stones and bricks, stones. This is in the House chamber overlooking the speaker's rostrum, Moses, to remind them that we are based on the Ten Commandments. All right. It's literally facing the rostrum. Now, the goal of secular humanists, globalists, and that's what I'd call them, secular humanists meaning that man is God, globalists, because they want to dethrone God and dethrone capitalism. they must bring down the Judeo Christian form of the United States as a leader in the world in order to establish their one world government, limiting speech under the guise of hate speech, redefining words like drag queen or artist, that type of thing. Word control is thought control. So this whole idea of controlling speech or controlling words or even redefining words. And of course, I mentioned before, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. So these books have made a big comeback lately. George Orwell completely understood what these movements were all about. He was part of the movement in Spain. And he wrote these two books, 1984, which brought about this whole idea of new speak, new words. The government is going to create a whole new vocabulary, so really people don't understand exactly what is meant. And in his book called Animal Farm, that's a really good little kind of a parody. It's actually kind of an interesting story of this farm and these animals that do away with a cruel farmer who was ruling them, so that they can all become equal. And then the pigs step up and they say, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal. So they take over control. And then from there, it got much worse than it originally was when the man ruled the farm, when the farmer ruled the farm. And this whole idea of how this group takes over through deception, and they take over, and what the ultimate result is devastation. So this is Karl Marx. And he's the architect of modern day communism. Again, his idea to dethrone God is destroy capitalism. He probably is the biggest hypocrite I can think of in history, because everything he said he did not do. He was not successful. His idea was he wanted to create this whole economic system that was going to, supposedly make people equal. This is going to kind of redefine how everything works, the whole system, to do away with capitalism. Well, it didn't work because the countries didn't even like it. They liked capitalism because capitalism was growing their economies and it was working good. The only country that adopted his communist system was Russia, which went against his whole idea because Russia was a peasant society, and they're the ones that did this. So later his ideas got kind of morphed into something different, and it's kind of what we have today. He also talked about something called critical theory, which is, long story short, is this whole idea of breaking down the society norms, all of the structures, the family, the educational system, that type of thing. It's also called cultural Marxism. Now, to carry that a little further, we had a group in Europe called the Frankfurt School, which literally took his ideas and kind of brought them even further on. And they came to the United States, and they brought a lot of them over here. And they've had some very good success. They came to the United States in the 1930s and 40s. Now, what's interesting is this whole idea of cultural Marxism is different than just economic. It's this whole idea of the whole life system. It's literally patterned after what Alexander the Great did. This guy that we looked at before. And he created this idea of Hellenism. They'll never be able to resist what I'm going to show them. I'm going to take over the media, the education, the religion, and the sports. And his lifestyles that he created were really popular, and it was a great threat to Israel during the time Jesus was teaching in Israel. And we've learned about that already with some of the stories. So he's literally, the pattern of Alexander the Great is very, very similar to what we're seeing with cultural Marxism. Why? Here's the idea. He determined that every town, Alexander the Great did, should have a theater. And in the theater would be the idea of entertainment and the idea of media. That's where they would learn about the news of the day. He said, I'm going to build one of these to control what people think, what they hear about the news, and what their entertainment is. I'm going to control them through the theater, and they will not be able to resist. I'm going to create gymnasiums. Now, gymnasiums were schools back then. And I'm going to control the schools, the thinking, so that we can capture the youth. And they will be ours. They will believe in Hellenism. They won't be able to resist. I'm going to build amphitheaters in every single town. And he did. He did all four of these in every town. And in the amphitheater was the sports. Even the sports. We're going to help capture the minds of the people. It was going to be part of his whole plan. And the other one I skipped right here was a theater. And the theater, of course, was the religion or the teaching. So that was going to be part of it too. So even though it certainly wasn't Christianity, it was going to be other types of thinking. It was going to be kind of man-centered, that idea. Now, a few of the 45 communist goals for America. I know I'm covering a tremendous amount here, and you might want to even watch this in a couple of settings. That's up to you. But anyway, there's so much here, and this is different than normal, as I mentioned before. It's not, it's different than my normal presentation, but here we go. A couple more things. This idea of the 45 communist goals for America, they had them all spelled out. In 1963, these were discovered. And I just want you to listen to this. I'm going to read them kind of quick. Now think about what's going on today and think about these communist goals. One of them, promote the United Nations as the only hope for mankind. If his charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one world government. That obviously is pretty clear. Get control of schools. Use them as the transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Wow, has that ever happened? Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any other phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that violates the principles of the separation of church and state. And of course, that's happening in the United States, and all of that is based on a lie, and that's another whole story. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate. Remember, it was based on the Bible, Constitution, Declaration. Old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs. A hindrance to cooperation between nations and on a worldwide basis. Common theme over and over again. Discredit the American founding fathers. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to the social agencies. Treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders, which no one but psychiatrists can understand or treat. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of the parents. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition. That students and special interest groups should rise up and make a united force to solve economic, political, or social problems. Folks, I don't know if you listen to those close, if that doesn't sound like what's going on today, I don't know what does. And then later, this whole idea of open borders became very, very central from these groups here. Very central. Now, and many people will say this when we're talking about borders, which is a very big thing today, the Bible says that we should have these open borders and full acceptance. Is that true? Well, let's go back to this reference right here, because this is what they're citing. Exodus 12:38. Many other people, which is literally in Hebrew is a mixed multitude of people, went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. Okay, so who were those people? Well, likely they're mostly Egyptian, with some other nationalities mixed in. They may have been impressed by God's power in the 10 plagues. Others may have converted to the faith of the Israelites, as well as claiming the promises of God's covenant. Were they to remain separate, not to contribute and be loyal to Israel? No. Now, this is just one reference of others that could be cited, but a foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in the household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies both to the native born and to the foreign residing among you. And so there were provisions like this, which kind of made them all one. In other words, they blended in with the Israelites, even though they were a different ethnicity. They were one in terms of having the same goal, working together, that whole idea. And of course, that's how we set up the United States originally. We had this oath of allegiance. It was a comprehensive loyalty oath requiring prospective citizens to support the Constitution, renounce allegiance to any foreign state, and swear to bear arms or perform non-combatant service when required by law. That's how we were set up. So we kind of go with that 40,000 foot level and look down upon the United States in terms of these different groups that are assaulting us, trying to work away at bringing down the United States. We have the global elites. We have this idea of Marxism and communism, which are the same, of course. And then we even have something called radical Islam, which is very much part of that whole thing. So there's different players, but they have the same goals: bring down the United States and also Israel, which we haven't talked about here, but we will in a future time. They were individual group will get control, and ultimately they're going to have conflict with each other. And actually, history has shown that, but that's another story. And their key method is always the same. It's lies. So the father of lies is going to always be the same here. And of course, Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth. For there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language. For he is a liar and a father of lies. So in terms of this communism and the Marxism, we have this whole idea of this book right here kind of illustrates it, but this idea of disinformation, this was the policy of the KGB for the communists. They created stories that were lies to kind of create disunity within the United States. And they did this on a massive scale. In fact, they found it so effective, they had more money and manpower involved with just this than anything else. This man, Ion Pacepa, was a Romanian agent who was really the top of the heap in terms of this whole program. He knew all the players because he was involved with it. He eventually got out of it, escaped. He actually eventually become a Christian too, moved to the United States, and he just died a couple years ago of old age. They were obviously wanted him dead, but they were not able to. In this book right here, it's fascinating. If you want to read about it, he lays it out exactly how all of this worked, all these lies that they laid out there, and how powerful they were. It's very fascinating. And more of a modern day version of this Marxist type thinking was this guy right here named Saul Alinsky. He wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And this is how he begins his book. It's a book about really confusing the enemy, creating all these stories to, lies and making up things just to confuse the debate. But he says this at the beginning: lest we forget, at least for the and over the shoulder, an acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom was Lucifer. Wow. He just kind of spelled it out. His whole concept, he literally spelled it out. The father of lies is what he's basing his whole book over. And this particular guy right here was one of the ones who helped deceive the United States. He wrote a book called People's History of the United States. He was really a Marxist too. And this whole book, he hates this country, and he wanted to just rewrite our history into a totally different history to teach children that we're an evil empire and always have been. And basically we need to be done away with to create this global order. It's kind of like this big, broad idea. His book is really incredible. It had great, in terms of its negative impact, it had great influence. In fact, it's still used today. And it's pretty amazing. I taught history and geography, and it was pretty hard to imagine the power of a book like this. But it was accepted because you had many people in that movement in the higher levels of education who subscribed to all his teachings. They believed in this kind of thing. So that today we had generations of kids rereading our history, reading a different history of the United States, this guy's history, that 62% of kids or young people under 30 favor socialism. But they don't even know what socialism is because they simply have been taught something that's very, very different. Another big theme we've learned about here. And this is Lenin, who simply made it very, very clear, the goal of socialism is communism. Now, some people try to take the word socialism and make it kind of like into a good word. Ultimately, it's not. He literally spelled it out right here. It's state control. That's ultimately what it is. So we need to be aware of what is going on as Christians. And as I mentioned, it's important for us to understand so that we can literally combat this kind of thing. So, and this is another one. This would be in terms of radical Islam. At the beginning of our country, we tried to develop some trade in the Mediterranean Sea in Europe, and we had some real problems. Our merchant ships were being abducted by Muslim fleets from North Africa, and it was pretty bad. And a lot of our men were taken into slavery, and so that went on. And eventually, Jefferson, who was pictured on the left, and Adams on the right, tried to set up agreements, treaties with the Islamists who were doing this. And they did this, and they even paid they paid money to, to prop up the fact that they would not do this anymore because our economy was in shambles, losing all of our merchant fleets. And so they signed these agreements, but this kept going on, and they didn't understand, why are you not going by the agreement that we signed, these different agreements? So they finally went to North Africa to learn exactly what was going on. And they talked to this Muslim leader, and he explained to him simply the idea. It's called taqiyya in the Islamic world, and it simply means that it's the idea of, it's kind of deception too. It's the idea that we will never agree to follow an agreement or follow through with an agreement with a non-Muslim called a kafir, because we're not allowed to, because of our Quranic teachings teach only with fellow Muslims, not with non-Muslims. And they just found this incredible. They couldn't believe it because it was so contrary to the United States. But this whole idea, taqiyya, is also another word that's based on deception. So we have this element too on the United States, and we have this going on today with a group called the Muslim Brotherhood, which has got pretty strong influence in the United States. They began in the 20s in Egypt. After the last caliphate, the Ottoman Empire fell, and it began in Egypt, and the idea was to create a new caliphate, a Muslim caliphate. And they kind of picked up, and they've accelerated within Egypt and other countries in that idea. And their whole purpose is to eliminate and destroy the Western civilization from within. In other words, by their own hands, not necessarily by a war. Well, events in the Muslim Brotherhood become unpopular even in Egypt. In fact, in Egypt today, it's declared a terror group. It's declared a terror group in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in other countries too. But unfortunately, in the United States, it is not. They helped create Hamas, by the way. It is very powerful in the United States. They have agencies, or they have actually student clubs on almost every single college campus. And they're working with a lot of the Marxists to go against Israel and this whole river to the sea, getting rid of this whole Palestinian movement, river to the sea against the Israelis, is very much dictated by them. So that's another element of this. And then we have the global elites, which would be represented by the Great Reset, is what they call it, the World Economic Forum. And that's pretty incredibly fascinating. Their whole idea is you'll own nothing and be happy. Okay. And their idea eventually is to create a programmable digital currency. They want to set up the system. They refer to it as ESG, environment, social, and governance, where they can kind of monitor people as to how they perform in certain areas, like their economic systems. Their social would represent even their faith or their religion, and their governance, as to how all of this works so that they could have some control over it and create this idea of the programmable digital currency that could be used unless you violated certain things, which sounds an awful lot like the mark of the beast, which not able to buy and sell unless you have the mark. Now, I'm not going to get into more detail on that, but it's kind of really fascinating. We seem to be moving towards these revelation prophecies pretty fast right now. Nimrod wanted all together in the city. These global elites, the great resetters, they want the same. And why is that? Because in this city, people don't own their own property. They're kind of easier to control. And that was kind of this whole idea, even Nimrod back in that time period, that you own nothing and you will be happy, so that the government can control. Now, God's plan. So the Lord scattered him, back to the story. He scattered him from there over all the earth. So they stopped building the city. I know I've deviated for a while here, but back to the story. So they stopped building the city. He scattered him. All right. And notice that Jesus said too, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. Okay, so that's the plan, to all nations, and then the end will come. So that's what God did, and Jesus spoke of it. The building on the left is the European Parliament building in Strasbourg, France, and the one on the right is the Tower of Babel. It's kind of interesting how much the Parliament building resembles the Tower of Babel. And there's an interesting story behind that. Many believe that it was done intentionally. Very likely was. Hard to know, but it's pretty clear. If you look at it, you can see kind of this unfinished building, just like the Tower of Babel was ultimately unfinished because God stopped them. Now, what God teaches us in terms of creation, back to the bricks and the stones again. If we look upon this in terms of does he want similarity of bricks? Does he want uniformity, or does he want stones? All this great variety. Just in terms of creation, we have 18,000 species of birds. We have about 925,000 at least species of insects, 60,000 types of trees, and about 200 billion trillion stars. So, does God want uniformity of everything? Does he want, this whole control idea? Clearly not. He created everything with great diversity, everything very, very different. The whole idea of Greek, going back to Alexander the Great, was to elevate physical beauty, intellect, law, or had a low opinion of manual labor. And of course, Hebrew had a high opinion of manual labor. That God created each person with unique individual talents. And all of this, the Alexander the Great Hellenist worldview went from the Greek Empire to the Roman Empire to Europe, and then of course it came over here. So we have that type of thinking literally through our history. But if we go to Hebrew, the word for work and worship is abad. It's exactly the same thing. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. So that's interesting. This whole idea of all these different occupations, literally work and worship are the same thing. In terms of children, you knit me in my mother's womb. All these children from all parts of the world, all different, all amazing, all loved in God's sight. Everyone knit in their mother's womb. Now, if a rabbi with authority enter a room of a craftsman who is busy at his trade, okay, he would not be expected, I'm going to go back to that a second, the rabbi would not expect that man to stand up for the powerful rabbi, okay? He would watch the sculptor, in this case, work, and he would just watch him, the skill that God created him, because that was worship in a sense, using the skills that God gave him to create the structure that he's making, this jar, this item. In terms of the word wisdom, where was that first used in the Bible to understand? Or we're going back in this whole idea of Hebrew. I'm covering a lot here, I realize, but I'm almost finished. This whole idea, how does that work? The world has this kind of this idea of you have to have all these degrees, that type of thing. That's not biblical. If we look at this first mention of the word wisdom in the Bible, and all the women that were wise-hearted did spin with their hands and brought that which they had spun, both of blue and of purple and of scarlet and of fine linen. Now, literally, of wise hearts and wisdom, that's the word for wisdom, Chokmah. The word is Chokmah, and the first mention is right here. So that clearly would represent the skill that God gave him. In this case, they were making it for the tabernacle and eventually the temple. And of course, Paul said this, just as a body, though one has many parts, but all of its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. And of course, Jesus prayed this in the garden. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. And the word he would have used is echad, one from many. That's actually this whole idea of multiple and yet one, all diverse, different, but one. In this case, he's speaking of the Trinity. We actually have this idea in the Statue of Liberty, okay? This whole idea from one many. And it's a biblical idea of all these people are going to create this one nation. Not multiple nations, but one nation. And this, in terms of this picture of this church, this little stone church right here. You also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house. Now, God's desire for his church is to have a church of living stones, and the picture would be all different sizes, all different shapes put together to create his house. All these unique talents, all these unique individuals, all these unique personalities, using the talents he's given him, Abad, to create his house. Now, this is where we're going right back to the idea of stones again. I know I've come a long way here, but from the bricks to the stones, God said, no, stones. You are stones. God's ultimate plan in Revelation 18 is this: Babylon the Great is fallen. In Revelation, the Babylon represented the final globalist world government, one world religion. Ultimately, does it work? Does God allow? The kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. Clearly, it does not. That Babylon, the one that was created, and this whole idea of making all people bricks the same, governed by this leader, this Nimrod, or these future Nimrods, is not God's plan. It's individual living stones to create this literally freedom to live in a way that God created us, which really is incredibly powerful. Again, I know this is long. It has a lot to do with what's going on in the United States right now. So this is different than my other presentations will be. But I just thought this is a good timing on this, so I decided to go ahead and do this. Thank you for watching today, and shalom.